a small quadcopter drone, no larger than a dinner plate and built for under $500, lifted off the reeds and began its journey 22 miles straight across the Black Sea. Its target wasn't a tank or a soldier. It was something far more valuable: Russia's eyes. The Boyko Tower, once a civilian gas extraction platform, now stood as a fortified military outpost zone of Moscow's most important surveillance hubs in the northwestern Black Sea. Rising 130 feet above the waterline and outfitted with radar, antennas, and Russian personnel, the platform had become a symbol of Russia's reach far beyond Crimea. At the heart of it was the Neva radar system, a Soviet-era K-band surveillance array with a 28-mile detection radius. For months, it had been tracking Ukrainian aircraft and boats, feeding targeting data back to Russian command. But the Ukrainians had a plan, and that plan didn't involve billion-dollar jets or NATO missile strikes. It relied instead on the precision of first-person view drones, improvised explosives, and one pilot's nerve. What followed was not just a drone strike. It was a demonstration of ingenuity, adaptation, and asymmetric warfare. This wasn't just about disabling a radar. It was about sending a message. The Black Sea was no longer safe for Russian ambitions. And in the span of just minutes, the skies above the sea and the steel fortress below would witness something Moscow never expected: a $500 revolution. The plan was never about brute force. It was about precision. And that precision rested in the hands of one man call sign Soil. Operating from a camouflaged SBU bunker nestled in the coastal marshes, Soil slipped on his FPV goggles and gripped the controller. What he saw wasn't a map or a screen, it was the world through the eyes of a drone he'd helped build just days earlier. The drone, a 10-inch quadcopter frame cobbled together from Chinese parts in a Kyiv workshop, looked like something out of a hobbyist's garage. But this was no racing drone anymore. Zip-tied to its underside was a hand-built explosive charging early, 7 pounds of high-grade plastic explosive, meticulously engineered to detonate on impact. But what made this drone lethal wasn't just the payload, it was the design. With a compact frame and no GPS dependency, it flew low under 160 feet and fast, zigzagging across the sea to avoid detection. It streamed real-time analog video straight into Soil's goggles, allowing him to steer with surgical accuracy. And thanks to its small radar, cross-section no larger than a seabird, it was almost impossible for Russian systems to pick up. At takeoff, the drone's 4 brushless motors whined up to 20,000 revolutions per minute, lifting it into the humid Black Sea air. It began its 22-mile journey, skimming the waves, invisible to radar, inaudible above the wind. Through his headset, Soil saw the shimmering sea, the morning haze, and far ahead barely visible a dot on the horizon growing larger. That dot was Boyko Tower, and in less than 50 minutes, the world would learn what a $500 drone in the hands of a skilled operator could do to one of Russia's most important military eyes on the sea. Through his FPV goggles, Soil could see it now clear, sharp, and ominous. Rising 130 feet above the waves, bolted to the highest point of the Boyko Tower, was the Neva radar system. This wasn't some outdated piece of Cold War scrap. It was one of the few legacy Soviet surveillance arrays that still worked, and it worked well. The Neva radar operated in the K-band at 35 gigahertz, using a rotating antenna array that swept the skies and sea every few seconds. It could detect both aircraft and naval vessels across a 28-mile radius, giving Russian forces an unblinking eye over a large swath of the northwestern Black Sea. More critically, it could track up to 200 targets simultaneously, feeding real-time data to Russian command posts and forward-deployed weapon systems. If a Ukrainian drone or fast attack boat entered the zone, Nebraska VA would see ITAND Russian missiles wouldn't be far behind. That's why it had to go. For months, Ukrainian naval operations had been hampered by Neva's reach. Attempts to move unmanned surface vessels or even recon drones through this corridor were met with interception or electronic disruption. Neva wasn't just watching it, was denying Ukraine access to its own waters. And it wasn't just about vision. With Neva intact, the Boyko Tower acted as a coordination hub, connecting radar tracking with communications, anti-aircraft systems, and long-range weapons deployed along along the Crimean coast. But no radar system, not even Neva, was built to withstand a direct hit from a precision-guided FPV drone carrying a high-explosive payload. As the platform drew closer in Soil's goggles, he knew exactly where to strike. The antenna's rotating base, the mechanical heart of the system. One shot, one hit. That was all it would take. The closer Soil flew, the more the Neva radar filled his view. The drone, now less than 160 feet above the sea surface, danced along its pre-planned zigzag route low, erratic and invisible to the very system it was about to destroy. Every turn, every correction was manual. This wasn't AI. It was Soil's eyes, his hands, and his heartbeat controlling every inch. At just over half a mile out, he began the terminal approach. Russian personnel were visible through the feet-tiny figures on the lower decks, walking, working, unaware. The Neva's antenna continued its slow, mechanical sweep, scanning for threats it couldn't see, and it never would. The drone had the signature of a large seabird, barely noticeable on radar, if at all. No heat signature, no electronic ping, just 4 motors humming at 20,000 revolutions per minute, a handmade explosive charge strapped beneath, and a pilot who knew exactly where to hit. At 650 feet out, Soil locked in, the sweet spot, the rotating junction between the radar antenna and its control array. One strike there and the entire system would collapse. At 40 miles per hour, the drone surged forward. A Russian soldier pointed too late. Another reached for a rifle butt. The drone was seconds away. 9:20 a.m. The quadcopter slammed into the Neva's rotating base. Instant detonation. The explosion wasn't massive, but it didn't need to be. Aluminum sheeting vaporized. Internal waveguides shredded. Transmitters obliterated. The radar's spinites, mechanical, and electrical core was gone. A surveillance system worth millions reduced to twisted metal by a drone that cost less than a year of Netflix. As black smoke curled from the tower, Soil exhaled. One target down. And Ukraine's war over the Black Sea had just begun. As smoke billowed from the shattered remains of the Neva radar, Russian troops on Boyko Tower scrambled to make sense of the hit. But before they could react, Ukraine had already launched Phase Twan this time. It wasn't about disabling sensors. It was about erasing the entire platform. 30 miles offshore and closing fast, a sleek, gray vessel sliced through the waves. It wasn't a boat. It wasn't a missile. It was Sea-Babya, 20-foot-long unmanned surface drone, purpose-built by Ukraine's SBU for one mission: structural annihilation. Unlike the FPV quadcopter that relied on human reflexes and makeshift explosives, Sea-Baby was engineered from the keel up for maritime warfare. Beneath its narrow hull sat 2,200 pounds of military-grade high-explosive ESA warhead, designed not just to blast, but to collapse reinforced concrete and melt steel. Shaped charges were arranged around the bow to create a cascading, sympathetic detonation effect. It didn't just explode, it destroyed everything it touched. Its twin 200 horsepower inboard water jet engines pushed it at 49 knots, roughly 90 kilometers per h, maintaining a low profile on the waterline to avoid radar detection. Guided by a GPS inertial system and a high-definition camera, Sea-Baby navigated with mechanical precision capable of micro-adjustments up to the moment of impact. And unlike the FPV drone, Sea-Baby didn't need to improvise. Its target was static. Its approach was planned down to the last second. And now, with Neva's radar silenced, the Boyko Tower was completely blind to surface threats. Through encrypted satellite links, SBU operators watched their steel assassin advance excellent, deadly, and unstoppable. The Russians saw smoke. They didn't see what was coming next. Sea-Baby wasn't coming for a radar dish. It was coming to collapse a fortress. Boyko Tower, once a civilian gas extraction platform, had been transformed by Russian forces into a multi-level military installation. Steel walkways connected living quarters, storage rooms, communication hubs, and fuel tanks all perched 130 feet above the Black Sea on a latticework of reinforced columns. It wasn't just a lookout point. It was a forward operating base, complete with supplies, power, and defensive positions meant for long-term occupation. But every fortress has a weak point, and Ukrainian engineers found it. Their intelligence pinpointed the structural junction between the drilling platform and the main accommodation, blocked the load-bearing connection, holding the platform's upper levels together. Destroy that one point, and the rest of the tower would collapse like a house of cards. Sea Baby's mission wasn't to disable, it was to delete. At 28 miles out, the drone's high-definition cameras locked onto its target. Operators on the ground monitored every frame, watching the platform grow larger on their screens. Russian troops were moving now, still stunned by the earlier FPV strike, unaware they were standing on a time bomb. Unlike missiles or airstrikes, Sea Baby brought no warning. No radar ping, no sonic boom. Just a gray silhouette skimming the waves, hidden beneath the morning glare. The approach vector was surgical, the targeting data precise. The goal hit the load, bearing seam at full speed with 2,200 pounds of explosives, turning architectural vulnerability into catastrophic failure. This wasn't an act of harassment, it was an act of erasure. Boyko Tower wasn't just going offline, it was about to disappear. And Sea Baby was seconds from delivering that final sentence. At 9:50 a.m., Sea Baby made contact, traveling at nearly 56 miles per hour, 90 kilometers per h, and loaded with 2,200 pounds of high explosives. The unmanned vessel slammed into the precise structural seam between the Boyko Tower's drilling platform and its living quarters. The impact triggered a shaped charge detonation engineered for maximum destruction. The result was nothing short of apocalyptic. In a split second, the central support beams liquefied under temperatures exceeding 6,300 degrees Fahrenheit, steel twisted, concrete vaporized. The accommodation block where dozens of Russian personnel had been stationed had vanished in a fireball that consumed the sky. And then, like a dying beast, the rest of the platform began to fall. But that was only the beginning. The blast ignited a chain reaction. Diesel tanks ruptured one by one, exploding with thunderous force. Ammunition stores, communication gear, and fuel depots detonated in rapid succession, creating secondary fireballs that ripped through the structure. Within moments, the entire tower became a roaring inferno. A plume of black smoke rose over 3,000 feet into the air, visible to satellites, foreign navies, and the world. The sea itself boiled beneath the wreckage. In under 5 minutes, what had been a multi-level forward base was now a floating graveyard. The upper decks collapsed into the waves. Supplies, weapons, and twisted steel rained down like burning shrapnel. The few Russian personnel who survived the initial blast were trapped on wreckage too unstable to stand on, too toxic to breathe near, and far too dangerous to extract from. Their radios were silent. Their radar was gone, and their last hope had just sunk into the Black Sea. As the last flames smoldered above the wreckage of Boyko Tower, one thing became undeniable. The rules of warfare had changed. What Ukraine accomplished on May 19th wasn't just a tactical strike, it was a strategic statement. In the span of 80 minutes, with a combined cost of less than $10,000, Ukraine eliminated one of Russia's most fortified surveillance outposts in the Black Sea. No fighter jets, no cruise missiles, no billion-dollar defense contracts, just a racing drone strapped with homemade explosive sand, a 20-foot Sea Baby engineered for surgical annihilation. This wasn't science fiction, it was ingenuity. It was asymmetric warfare in its purest form. The world watched as Ukraine demonstrated what happens when creativity outpaces convention. A drone built from Chinese hobby parts and guided through FPV goggles neutralized a radar system designed to control an entire region. And a sleek, unmanned surface vessel, fueled by speed and precision, brought down a steel giant meant to stand for decades. This operation shattered assumptions that only major powers could carry out precision strikes, that surveillance systems were invincible, that the Black Sea was Moscow's domain. No longer. With 2 drones and one meticulously coordinated plan, Ukraine turned Russia's symbol of strength into a symbol of vulnerability. And more than that, it offered a blueprint for the future of warfare. Cheap, fast, smart, and brutal when it needs to be.